Pyatt. I'm the Collections and Archives Manager here at the Folk School, and tonight I'm presenting about the co-founder, Marguerite. So in August of last year, the Folk School Spain Archives received an especially exciting donation, 7 boxes of papers and photographs collected by the school's co-founder, Marguerite Butler. These were shipped all the way from Denmark by the heirs to Marguerite's estate, and one reason why it was exciting was Bethany and I had no idea that these existed until Helen Ullin contacted us to say, do you want them? So the materials are intriguing for many reasons. They provide the fullest look at the life of Marguerite, from her ancestry to her childhood, college years, and decades of involvement with the folk school. Her journals document her experiences in early adulthood, including her time at Pine Mountain Settlement School in Kentucky and then traveling to Scandinavia. There's hundreds of photographs and slides that show the folk school and parts of Brasstown from the late 1920s through the 1960s or 70s. So I'm excited to pull from many of these materials tonight to illustrate Marguerite's life and work. So who was Marguerite Butler? Marguerite was born in 1892 to John and Carrie Butler. John Butler was born in Ireland. It's not clear when he immigrated. The records don't even show who his parents were. He's listed as a grocer on his death certificate. Caroline, or Carrie Bradbeer Butler, was born in Illinois. John and Carrie married in 1886, and they had 3 children together, Walter, Jeanette, and Marguerite, who was the youngest. And then here's a family photo of them with their dog, Colonel, just before World War I, and Walter was a World War I veteran. So just to give a quick timeline overview of Marguerite's life, she was born in 1892 in Cincinnati, Ohio. She was well educated. She attended schools in Cincinnati through high school, and then went to Vassar College, the all-women's college in New York State. After graduating, Marguerite became involved in educational work at Appalachian settlement schools. She was at Pine Mountain Settlement School for 8 years, during which time she met Olive Dame Campbell at a conference of Southern Mountain workers. Olive invited Marguerite to join her on a research trip to Scandinavia, with the goal to study Danish folk schools and how this educational model could be brought to the United States. Olive and Marguerite found a site for their folk school in 1925, chartered the John C. Campbell Folk School, where we are here today, and quickly started community programs as they built up the school's campus to support residential students. In 1936, Marguerite married her folk school co-worker, George Bidstrup. The couple moved off campus in 1947 to their own newly built home in Brasstown. George became the director of the school in 1952. The couple officially retired from working here in 1967. George passed away just a few years after that. While Marguerite continued to live in Brasstown for most of the rest of her life, she did move into a nursing home towards the end, and she passed away at age 90 in 1982. Marguerite's family was pretty prosperous, as you can tell from the exterior of their family home in the Mount Auburn neighborhood of Cincinnati. And according to Wikipedia, this early suburb was founded as a hilltop retreat for Cincinnati's social elite, where wealthy people could escape the dirt, heat, smoke, and crowded conditions of the lower city. And then there's some shots too in her photos of, this is her childhood room in Cincinnati. And one of the interesting things about her collection is just how many photographs there are that go back to her teen years and young adult years. So she had access to a camera and to a lot of film pretty early on. It's fascinating to me to compare this to how hard it is to find rural Appalachian photographs for the same time period versus Marguerite has scrapbooks full of family travels, photos from her family travels, her 4 years at Vassar College, 4 scrapbooks just of her college years. And a lot of casual shots of her friends, relatives, pets, and surroundings. And here's one of her college scrapbooks. And I find Marguerite's Vassar College materials particularly interesting to look through just because it's what was a college like as a young woman in the 1910s? Marguerite's scrapbooks are full of pictures of smiling women engaged in both official college activities and maybe some more shenanigans. Among her books, there's this huge scrapbook, it's this thick. That's a collection of college memorabilia that's pasted onto the pages. A couple of them are up here. It seems like she saved pretty much every piece of paper from her college years that's not related to class for the most part. It's her social relationships and her extracurricular activities. Marguerite was introduced to what is referred to as mountain work in her high school and college years. There is a talk about work in Tennessee that she attended in high school. That's what initially sparked her interest in Appalachia. She had conversations about the Kentucky mountains with her friend and fellow Vassar student Frances Jewell, who went on to be an English professor at the University of Kentucky, and wrote about Kentucky and Appalachian life, including The Blossom Woman, about Pine Mountain Settlement School founder Catherine Pettit. Marguerite first heard about Pine Mountain in Harlan County, Kentucky, through a connection that her friend Ethel McCullough had with Pine Mountain architect Mary Rockwell. And at that time, in 1913, Pine Mountain had just been founded by Catherine Pettit and Ethel DeLong. Marguerite wrote to Catherine about her interest in Appalachian work, and Pettit hired her to work at the new school after Marguerite graduated from Vassar in 1914. And just to note, another Vassar graduate from the same time period was Helen Wilmer Stone Viner. She also worked at Pine Mountain Settlement School from 1914 to 1922 alongside Marguerite. Wilmer went on to be known for her weaving and natural dyeing in western North Carolina as part of the Appalachian Craft Revival. So there's this whole set of interconnections of college-educated women, often from the Northeast, coming into the mountains to do different kinds of settlement school work and also craft revival work. Marguerite's first position at Pine Mountain was as a teacher. In its early years, the school went only through 3rd or 4th grade. It was mostly for younger children. Marguerite taught history, geography, and arithmetic, and also did some private tutoring. She was a house mother for some of the children who boarded at the school because their families lived too far away for them to go back and forth every day. She accepted no pay during her first year at Pine Mountain as the school was struggling for money, and after that she was paid $25 a month. Marguerite's years at Pine Mountain were her in-person introduction to Appalachian life and settlement schools, providing experiences that then informed her work at the folk school. She became accustomed to rural mountain life, the challenges of travel in the region, the culture of the area, and the hardships and needs experienced by many Appalachian people. Pine Mountain was also a close-knit community of school staff, students, and local people living with each other or as close neighbors, working and eating together and dancing together, which sounds a whole lot like the folk school. Pine Mountain had craft programs and community dances, much as would be put into place at the folk school. Marguerite also experienced the organizing, fundraising, and building efforts required to create and expand new institutions serving rural Appalachian communities. Marguerite distinguished herself at Pine Mountain as a dedicated and capable staff person. In 1919, she supervised the development of Pine Mountain's extension or satellite location at Lime Fork. In 1920, she was appointed the superintendent of all extension work, so she worked with both Pine Mountain and the county school system to supervise 11 one-room public schools. And she had to travel on horseback to visit these locations, and as part of this work, also traveled out of state on fundraising tours. She was invited to speak about her work at the Conference of Southern Mountain Workers, where she met Olive Dame Campbell in 1919. In 1922, Olive arranged funding from the American Scandinavian Foundation to travel through Denmark and other Scandinavian countries for 18 months to visit and study folk schools. The funding provided enough for several people to go over, so Olive originally invited Catherine Pettit of Pine Mountain Settlement School to accompany her. Pettit responded that she was too old and suggested that Marguerite go instead. Thus, Marguerite went on leave from Pine Mountain in 1922 and 1923 to travel across Europe with Olive. Their goal was to bring lessons and models from the Scandinavian folk schools back to the United States to inform work at Appalachian schools. And the aim was to educate the rural population in a way that would give them the choice to stay on the land rather than have to seek jobs and social opportunities in cities. Olive and Marguerite returned from Europe and presented on their research at the Conference of Southern Mountain Workers, where they were encouraged to begin a folk school themselves rather than apply the model to existing schools. In 1925, the duo spent months traveling through southern Appalachia to locate an ideal site for this school. They didn't want it to be directly on a railroad or in a town with other activities like a movie theater that could compete with community recreation. The location also couldn't be too remote because people need to be able to get there. They were looking for good farmland inhabited primarily by people who owned their own land already, as these conditions provided a solid and stable basis for agricultural life. Olive and Marguerite needed to be able to understand and work well with the local community, and they rejected locations where various community factions appeared to be in conflict with each other. They were looking for people who could cooperate together well. In fall 1925, Marguerite arrived in Murphy, North Carolina. She was invited here by Anne Ruth Metcalf, a public health nurse who had previously worked at Pine Mountain's Line Fork Extension. Elizabeth Smith, another Pine Mountain co-worker who had also moved to Cherokee County, showed Marguerite around the area. What Marguerite saw here fit with the requirements that she and Olive had. Intrigued by the prospect of a new school in the area, Fredo Scroggs and his father, Lucius Scroggs, came to visit Marguerite in Murphy. The Scroggs arranged meetings for Marguerite to explain the idea of the folk school to community members. And Marguerite later explained that these meetings were well attended, with the churches totally filling up where they were being held. It was a promising sign, since both Marguerite and Olive were adamant that a community had to truly want a folk school. They didn't want to be imposing a school on a community. After another month's travel in West Virginia, Olive came back with Marguerite to Southwest North Carolina to make their decision. By that point, Fredo Scroggs had collected over 100 pledge cards that promised labor and materials from local people, so it was pretty clear that the community around Brasstown was eager for the folk school to locate here. And so they officially chartered the folk school in Brasstown on November 23rd, 1925. Olive and Marguerite acquired land for the school that included farmhouse, which was renovated into their home and the initial base of operations for the folk school. They hired other staff for the folk school, including George Bidstrup. George immigrated from Denmark in 1926 to run the school's farm and to teach Danish gymnastics and other recreation. Community programming, including weekly singing games or play party games, began in early 1927. The folk school's original months-long residential program launched in late 1928, and summer short courses began to be offered in 1930. With Olive as the folk school's director, Marguerite worked as her assistant and as a teacher and a recreation leader. She also served on boards for other projects related to the folk school, like the Brasstown Credit Union and the Mountain Valley Cooperative. In April 1936, Marguerite married George Butler in Farmhouse. The couple continued to live on campus in Mill House for several years before building their own home and farm on land they purchased near the Mountain Valley Creamery in Brasstown. Their house, which they named Bidstrup Acres, is now referred to as Historic Bidstrup House, and you can stay there as an Airbnb. It was designed in 1947 by Asheville architect Henry Irving Gaines. It was furnished with ironwork made by folk school blacksmith Oscar Cantrell and furniture made at the school. George was the director of the folk school, again from 1952 until 1967, at which point both he and Marguerite officially retired from their work. What Marguerite may be best known for among her years at the folk school and in Appalachia in general is her involvement with music and dance. As already mentioned, she had first encountered Appalachian folk dance at Pine Mountain Settlement School, where the Kentucky running set was popular. At the folk school, concerns over local churches' views about dancing determined the original forms of recreation. Marguerite and others led what they called play party games or singing games, which were combinations of singing and physical movement, originally without music from instruments or records, but I think that changed within only a few years. Danish folk dances also entered the mix, and Marguerite later said that part of the reasoning for this, having this kind of recreation, was that we felt it was extremely helpful when people played together, they worked together, and we found that true here. By the early 1930s, other mountain workers were coming to the folk school during short courses to learn these traditional games. Marguerite and other folk school staff also brought games to the Conference of Southern Mountain Workers and to other places where they were demonstrating dance. In an oral history interview, Marguerite credited these workshops with sparking interest in folk dancing at Berea College in Kentucky, leading to the founding of the college's Berea Country Dancers group that still goes on today. They were just here for Fall Festival. Marguerite and George regularly attended Berea's Christmas Country Dance School, and they forged lifelong friendships with many others involved in Appalachian, Danish, and English country dancing. They published 2 booklets on Danish folk dances. Marguerite was active in musical areas as well, such as learning and promoting the recorder. And the Folk School Archives Library today still includes dozens of books collected by the Bidstrups on singing games and traditional dance. Oral histories tend to recall Marguerite fondly, though she was very strict when it came to dancing. Marguerite was exacting about proper behavior and correct form. As English country dance and contra dancing were added to the folk school's repertoire, she expected practice and perfection of the adults performing the figures. And while this intimidated some people, other early students recalled Marguerite as fun-loving and they were able to joke around with her. George was also recalled as having a very jovial character. Students referred to Marguerite as Miss Butler until she married, and then they actually started referring to her by her first name. By contrast, Olive was always referred to as Mrs. Campbell. Maggie Masters described Marguerite later in life as, quote, a wonderful old person and so positive and so sure of everything. One of Marguerite's legacies is the documentation of the school's early years that she left in the Folk School's archives. So even before those 7 boxes arrived from Denmark, correspondence such as her letters to Olive with her first impressions of Cherokee County and Brasstown in 1925 were preserved in the Folk School's collections. Other correspondence tracks connections with other craft revival and folk music and dance leaders like Clementine Douglas in Asheville and the McLean family in Kentucky. Oral histories recorded with Marguerite in the late 1960s and early 70s provide key details in telling the story of the origins and early years of the folk school. Materials received by the archives in 2024 include dozens of postcards from Marguerite and Olive's trip to Scandinavia, as well as Marguerite's travel journal with her itinerary and some impressions of the journey. And one of the work study students from this past year posted some about this on the website already, and I think that probably this collection had a lot more room for research for just learning more about like that Scandinavian basis than what developed here. One of my current works in progress is digitizing thousands of images taken by Marguerite of the folk school. I'm at about 300 right now. There's a lot more to go. So for the late 1920s through the early 1960s, she was taking black and white photographs. I have negatives and then some of the printed out copies for those. And then around the 60s and I think going into the early 70s, she switched to color slides. And again, there's like huge boxes of these, like multiple boxes to go through and scan. For what has already been processed, some of that's already coming out in exhibits that have gone up for the 100th anniversary, social media, and just other content for the centennial this year. Marguerite's life is intertwined with the history of the folk school. Like, I kind of skimmed over her later years, in part because it's just so difficult to separate her personal biography from like the whole first 50 years of folk school history. Marguerite's life was dedicated to mountain work, to residing within a community and developing educational, economic, and recreational programs intended to enrich rural Appalachian life. Marguerite's emphasis on recreation is the basis of the folk school's current music and dance programs, though we allow things now that she didn't, like banjos, square dancing, young children, and even bare feet in community room. Her promotion of music and dance lives on not only here, but also in places like Berea. The groundwork laid by Olive and Marguerite in the foundational ideals of the folk school, from the Danish philosophies to the emphasis on community engagement and a willingness to adapt to changing times and needs, has continued as the folk school has evolved over the decades into the vibrant place it is today. And then here's my sources for this. Some of these oral history interviews have a lot of in-depth information about the early years of the folk school, which is great. I read them actually for the first time for this presentation. It was like blown away by how much was in there. And then some other sources. So thank you.
All right. Good job.
What's a settlement school? I kept hearing that, and I know it's a term, I've heard it for years and years, but I don't really know what it is.
All right, I'm not great at defining what a settlement school is. I feel like it's kind of like, what's a folk school? But settlement schools were generally kind of a mixture of social work and educational work. The idea of most of the time aimed at children, but not always. Like there's Hyndman and Pine Mountain are the big ones in Kentucky, but then there's also ones those are aimed at Appalachia. But then other ones that were more for bettering the lives of immigrants, like in Chicago or New York City.
You just said Pine Mountain was in Kentucky where?
Pine Mountain is still operating as a school, and that is in Harlan County, Kentucky, so the far eastern part of the state.
Who did you say all the scrapbook and everything the material came from?
Yeah, so Marguerite's materials were inherited by Lissy Uland. The Ulands inherited all of Marguerite's estate, the house, everything. Lissy moved back to Denmark at some point in the 2000s, and her daughter Helen inherited those materials.
Wonderful, they kept it all.
Yeah, definitely fantastic that they kept it all.
There's an interesting conversation between John Campbell and Catherine Pettit when she was creating the Pine Mountain Settlement School. And Ms. Pettit is asking John, should I think about an independent school that's supported by the community with a community board of directors, or should we affiliate with a church denomination? Because there was so much denominational support for a whole variety of work in the mountains during that time. And John's reply is interesting. He said, well, if you create Pine Mountain as an independent school based on community support, your funding is going to be sporadic, and people who are encouraging you as early board members might not necessarily be there in the long term and commit to the financial needs of the school in the long term. Where the denomination will do that, but at the same time, the denominations are going to expect certain values and behavior in the school curriculum, on the part of teachers, on the part of students. So, you know, you need to decide. That's the way he left his advice. And my impression is that Pine Mountain was not affiliated with the denomination over the years. Is that what you know about it as well? Or Martha's been there. Was it created and has it perpetuated as an independent, community-supported, nonprofit organization without the church involvement?
I have to look that up because I actually don't remember. I'm trying to recall if there's a church on the campus or not. That seems rather telling.
There was a hospital on the campus.
Yeah, there's a lot of health work that was involved with Pine Mountain.
And the origin story is very similar in that the people that gave the land it was their farmland. They wanted the settlement school to occur, just like you have our origin story here. But I don't remember a lot of talk about denomination.
Susanna, I want to make a comment. I came here in '74 to take blacksmithing from Oscar Cantrell. And when I stayed here, I managed to barter with Gus and Maggie Masters, who were then the directors of Folk School, and did a bunch of caning on the chairs for the barter. And I stayed essentially on campus. There was an old house near the blacksmith shop that was rented by Jim Smith, who most people know was here. And what you may not have found out about Lisa Ullin was that she had a shop set up in the basement of that house, and she did what's called crown and bridge work, where she made bridges and did dental work downstairs, and then later on she turned to becoming a wood turner, and she had lathes, Lisa did, that would turn a 36-inch stump into some work of art. And when she moved back to Denmark, she took everything she could, including all the stumps that had not been turned, all the machinery, her chainsaws, and
Did you take the furniture her husband made?
most everything that she could load into these containers that you see that are seagoing. She loaded 3 or 4 of those with everything she could put her hands on. And when Lisa hired me and a bunch of people to work on the Bidster house, and we totally, redid it. And she started us out in the field with a pile of lumber that had been sitting there uncovered. And she said, now what I want to do is connect all the roofs of all the shops that she had made. And I was there for over a year doing a lot of different stuff, and including finishing the decagon, which her husband, I forget his first name, but he died of brain cancer, and then she started redoing all of that, the bits right. And the amazing thing was the types of woods that were used were local wood. It was just like your father's house. It was ash, it was mottled maple. It was just beautiful wood. And so she would come up, and Lacey would, every day at break time, she would make Danish the real way, and made a pot of coffee, and I think I gained 20 pounds just working there, because that's just the way she was. And the only time I ever saw her sit down, she went out there and was trying to figure out how to connect the roof of the decagon with the rest of the roofs of the house. And to this day, very few people know that when Lacey Orland's husband died, she took the ashes and put them underneath a 5-sided wood stove, and that's where he remains today. And we did all kinds of things, because when the house was built, there was the only access to Marguerite's sewing room was only about 6 feet tall, and you had to go through her closet for the girl I wound up calling Helen, because that's the way Lacey Owen would call her. But she was upset when she didn't answer the first time, so she would go, Helen, Helen, Helen. And she would do it over and over again. And as far as I know, she still owns some of the property, Helen does. And it turned out.
The original sign is still there by the creek.
Oh, yeah. It hadn't moved an inch. And I remember ordering something like $20,000 worth of Anderson windows to replace all the iron windows, which were definitely not thermopane. Nobody knew what thermopane was in 1974. So, and I don't know if she didn't give the land to Gus and Maggie to build their own house, which is right beyond the big house. And you can still have access from Mason Road down to where Gus and Maggie lived. So just whatever history I can add to that, it's there for you to listen to.
Have you seen the house, Susanna?
Yeah, I've been over to the house once.
Yeah, it's so cool. A doctor owns it now, his name is Joe Morgan, and he takes a lot of classes at the folk school, and his wife does as well. They're super nice people, and it is set up as a Airbnb, and it's really affordable to rent, and it will sleep like 9 people, and it's filled with Brasstown artifacts, folk school artifacts. It's like, it reminds me of when Jan and I visited Cashalot, which was Olive's cabin in Nantucket. When we walked in, it looked like we were inside the Keith house, because there was just lots of carvings and books and folk school type furniture and pictures and photographs, and Marguerite's house is still like that, because Joe and his wife just didn't change it much. It's very cool. It has a raised hearth in the kitchen, a fireplace that's up high that you can bake in, and I would highly recommend staying there sometime, or having and putting your people there if you need to spill over. We're talking to the choir here. This is a group of people that, care about the folk school and have been around for a very, very long time.
So we're also hoping to get the house listed, help get it listed as part of the National Register District too,
It's so
in the
cool.
next year.
It's got a lot of hidden rooms, like Martin was talking about. You kind of wander through it. It's like a maze, but it's
And you had to get to Helen's bedroom, you had to go through the closet in Lisa's bedroom, and it was so short
Yeah.
that we had to take the roof off of it just to give it some height, because it was made for really short people. And we had to take a closet and put a 3-foot diameter spiral staircase, and that's still there. And I hated to take some of the wood out that was lining the closet, but there was no other way. And I don't think an adult today can still go down that staircase.
So do you know, I know that Land Bishop was at Pine Mountain for some of those years too, right? Did Marguerite bring him here, and were there other people that came back and forth from Pine Mountain to the folk school during that time?
Yeah, my assumption is that he came here through that connection to Pine Mountain, and Marguerite would have also known like the older Ritchie siblings. That way too, like May was Leon Deschamps' wife, May Ritchie. They didn't meet Jean Ritchie until a little while later because she was pretty young when Marguerite was at Pine Mountain. I can't recall offhand of any other really direct Pine Mountain connections, but with the Council of Southern Mountain Workers, there's also just a whole lot of overlap in general between people going to different places, and even if they weren't working at the folk school, they might have been working at another school, come there for the short course, or run into people at Berea Country Dance, the Berea Christmas Country Dance School and other things like that.
Have you run across the correspondence between the director of Berea College and Olive Dame Campbell? Because they did have, as I understand, a regular letter writing correspondence in which the director of the Berea College would offer advice on different things about how to teach this and that.
Okay. I'll have to keep an eye out for it, because a lot of Olive's papers are actually at Chapel Hill,
Oh,
so it might have ended up there if it's not here.
David and I went a few years to Berea to the archives, and I said, gosh, I've never been to an archive before, what do you do? And David said, you just walk in and ask a question. Well, what am I gonna ask? Just say, Mrs. Campbell. So I said, Mrs. Campbell, and they just started putting things out on the table. And one of the ones that I enjoyed very much is she's writing to the president of Berea College saying, our butter fat is compromised. Could you please send back the Danish milk expert? Right? I didn't realize how conversational they were, but they were doing a lot of projects together. There was also a lovely letter from Marguerite after they had been in Scandinavia for a year and a half. She was so excited. So during their trip, they went to Finland and Sweden and Norway and Denmark, and they compared the cultural differences between these Scandinavian countries, and if they had a folk school setting that they could visit, and the differences between them. And then she writes this long letter, which is on my computer. I can show you if you, no, I don't. I'm joking you. In which she says, we have to do this thing. We have to do this thing.
didn't your mother establish some kind of relationship with the archives at one point?
She named the archives here.
Yeah,
She was a history buff, yep.
yeah.
Believes in history.
I remember her name, Mary Porter
Fame.
Fane.
We were building the dining hall at the time, and I sat down with my in-laws trying to figure out how to encourage a substantial donation to the dining hall building project. And all Mary Porter would consider is possibility of putting an archives downstairs in the dining hall, and she would make a nice gift towards the creation of that space for archives purposes. And it was a nice gift. But before we could get to the point of building the archives down there, I can't remember if it was an architect or builders were ruling against it, and there was interest in putting the craft shop there instead. And but I hung on to the check anyway, and we ended up using it in a different way to support the
Well, then the
archives.
archives got named after her, right? So
Yeah.
You did a good deed. You got it done.
Yeah, that was really our idea. What Mary Porter did not
Yeah.
make that as a condition to the
Sure.
gift.
I
She
get
did not do that. No. There are Marguerite stories that Loyal Jones told. There was apparently a perpetual kind of tension between Loyal and Marguerite, and I don't know. I mean, Martha knows about this as well, but I don't know if it began when she told Loyal he couldn't ride his horse over here anymore. Loyal lived right over there, and he couldn't ride his horse to the folk school anymore. He used to tie it up apparently right out of here in the trees as he tells
This
the
was the
story.
horse he taught to play dead.
So she Loyal respected Marguerite's request and didn't ride his horse over here anymore. But he was greatly looking forward to being old enough to dance here Friday night dances, and because Marguerite had told him that Loyal, you can't dance here until you turn 16. So he'd sit around and look in the window or whatever, but so when he was greatly anticipating turning 16, and so he turned 16 and came running over to the school to participate in the dance for the first time, and Marguerite said, I'm sorry, Loyal, we just changed the rules, you have to be 18. So, don't know if it's true or not, but Loyal, that's the way he liked to characterize his relationship with Marguerite.
And I still remember listening to Roy Stalker playing the banjo out here in the coffee room.
I think Marguerite wasn't here. When I first got here, that's what somebody said, Martha, Marguerite doesn't like the banjo. Well, what am I supposed to do?
Quit.
She's not here, so.
What was the reason?
Because it was the banjo.
Yeah, because
It's loud.
No, it represents, if you look at the kind of dancing they were doing here, banjo was not a part of it. So, where we live, our land is surrounded by stalk-ups, and when we're looking at that piece of land, Roy Stalk-up says now, they had dances there on Saturday night. They would take all the furniture out except for a chair for the fiddle player, and they dance all night. That was not the kind of dancing Marguerite was advocating. It's just a simple way that I can say it. That's why it was absolutely astonishing to me that this year the logo had a possum playing a banjo. My whole life I've been hiding my banjo. I've been playing loud if I could,
Yeah, I haven't quite sorted out why the differences in dancing. It's like English country dancing, country dancing, play parties, some of which are more traditional Appalachian, and then also traditional Danish things. Those are okay, but and promoting parts of Appalachian culture, but not the dance parts of Appalachian
Right.
culture. We're not going to have square dancing.
I think at that point you just have to use your
Well, it's
imagination.
because the churches didn't like it, and they were trying to tread very gently in the community and not, raise any eyebrows or be,
Yeah, but
the
then at a
costume.
certain point you have English and Contra, which are very similar to
Well,
square dancing.
Contra
Contra is
didn't
very
happen
new
until
here.
way later.
Yeah, very new
It
here.
was English and Danish, and then the play party games were called games instead of dances, but they were singing games. They were.
One thing that I've tried to, in all the connecting of all the dots, was Mrs. Campbell alerted Cecil Sharp. Okay, Cecil Sharp went to Pine Mountain Settlement School and saw the Kentucky running set. So we stood on the porch, except for the house burned down, they rebuilt it. We stood on the porch where he collected it. Made my skin just. But what I really found interesting was Bob Dulcimer told me that on their way back from Scandinavia, they went to one of Cecil Sharp's dance schools. So they had their idea around a particular tradition, and they were carrying that tradition here. And it was very different than what was done locally. So for better, for worse, for whatever, it was very different here.
When I happened to be sitting next to David Hyatt during the Fall Festival when the Berea dancers were dancing and did the Kentucky running set, and we're talking about George Beachstrip and the dances that they had learned from George and continuing to do in Berea. And so after it was over, I mean, it's a great presentation, great performance. And after it was over, I asked David if he had danced here Friday night during the Friday night dances. And he said, "Oh, I never missed one." He said, I love those dances. And I said, "Well, where was the fiddle and the banjo music in this community while that was going on and fiddles and banjos weren't invited?" And he said, "Oh, there was another dance tradition happening at the same time." And he mentioned a couple of the musicians. One, I think, was a fellow named Willard Hampton. I have to check with David about that. But he said that the folks who really look forward to a good time, which included some white liquor most of the time, had their own dance tradition going on, paralleling what was happening at the folk school. And it was happening, down Setaway
Martin Street.
and Martin Street, and and it was a very lively and a popular tradition. Kind of, they were happening side by side, but it was those associations with square dancing and fiddle and banjo and moonshine and all that had kind of generated the stereotype in Marguerite's mind, I'm sure, and probably Olive's too.